By the time the early 2010s came about, there was a resurgence in fighting games. Yes, you had the Tekken games still being churned out along with the Super Smash Bros. And the Guilty Gear series. But the masters of the fighting game genre, Capcom, had just released Street Fighter 4 back in 2008-2009 to arcade and consoles, Xbox 360 and the PS3, and there was suddenly a huge groundswell of interest in the fighting game genre once again. One of Capcom's biggest success stories outside of the Street Fighter games was the crossovers with Marvel. These games produced X-Men vs Street Fighter, Marvel Superheroes vs Street Fighter, and Marvel vs Capcom, Clash of the Heroes, and Marvel vs Capcom 2. With Street Fighter 4 breathing new life into the fighting game genre and influencing two of its biggest rivals, Mortal Kombat and King of Fighters, it was only a matter of time before there was a new generation of Marvel vs Capcom games to join the fray. Lo and behold, February 2011 saw the long-awaited release of the next game in the Versus series, Marvel vs Capcom 3 Fate of Two Worlds. Now, even though this video is about Ultimate Marvel vs Capcom 3, this was the original version, so there'll be a lot of jumping back and forth between the two versions of the game. Carrying on the style set by its predecessor Marvel vs Capcom 2, you take control of a team of 3 fighters which you can randomly swap during the course of the round and beat all 3 of your opponent's chosen characters and be declared the victor. I had been praying for a follow-up to one of the greatest fighting games ever in Marvel vs Capcom 2, and I have to say that there are pluses and minuses for this game, which I will get into in a bit. I remember watching the build-up to the release of this game back in 2011. I would watch all the trailers that would come out to get a feel of the game, and I also watched the demos that were shown at E3, and being at first a little unsure about the visual look, but the gameplay was excellent and more in line with what I'd grown accustomed to with the previous games. I was a little concerned about the roster and who was going to be in it. 2 of my favourite characters in the Marvel series are Cyclops and Gambit, and in all the trailers and the gameplay that I was seeing there was absolutely no sign of them, but I was still excited though for the game to come out. Now, I don't remember the exact date, but it was shortly after its release on February 18th, 2011 that I went and bought this game for the Xbox 360, and as I said earlier, there were pluses and minuses for this game. Okay, so some of the plus points: the lovely visual art stylized graphics, taking its cue from the Street Fighter 4 games, using the same cel shaded art style, but with a much darker texture. The gameplay is as insane as ever from the previous Versus games, being able to swap at will, hit multi-hit combos or air raids, performing single hyper combos or double hyper combos at once, or the big one, a triple threat hyper combo. The game's button mechanics have been simplified, so there isn't the standard 3 punch and 3 kick button layouts. It has now been remapped from the setup to a set of light, medium, heavy and special attacks. Also, there is a simple assist button which can be used to call out your partners with an assist attack during the game. This was previously mapped as using a punch and kick button simultaneously, so the single button is actually much easier to use. But personally, having played the previous Marvel vs Capcom games for years and years, and the previous Street Fighter games, this more simplified variation took some initial getting used to. Personally, if it were up to me, I'd have an option to change the button configuration between this new variation and the classic one, but that's my opinion. The roster comes with an initial 36 characters, which is a respectable amount. The character choices are a decent starting off point, each with their own unique fighting style, but the character selections are where the minus points come in for me. Marvel vs Capcom 2 had 56 characters in total, and this was on the previous 6th generation of console, which included the Sega Dreamcast and the PlayStation 2. Now here we are on the 7th generation of console gaming with HD and Blu-ray technology. Surely the roster size would be equal or more than Marvel vs Capcom 2. So to start off with 20 characters less was something of a little surprise to me. But I must stress, there were Marvel vs Capcom 2 characters that I did not particularly care for, so quality over quantity. But still, some of the roster selections were a bit of a head scratcher to me. Shumagorath, available via DLC along with Jill Valentine, was a character going back to Marvel superheroes that I did not particularly care for, and it somehow made it into this generation, ahead of characters like Juggernaut, Venom or Sabretooth. There is a small handful of X-Men characters with only Wolverine, Phoenix, Storm and Magneto making it here, Cable, who was prominent in Marvel vs. Capcom 2, does not make the cut here. And on the Capcom side of things, you had Ryu, Chun-Li, Akuma, and surprisingly Crimson Viper. There was also a host of characters from Capcom games, like the Resident Evil characters like Albert Wesker, Chris Redfield, and Jill Valentine. You also had from the Devil May Cry series, Dante and Trish. You also had Arthur from the Sega Genesis classic, Ghosts and Ghouls, making his fighting debut. Hagar from the Final Fight and Saturday Night Live games makes the roster. Amaterasu makes the roster and is also known for her appearance in the action-adventure game Okami. Darkstalkers are represented here with Hissien Ko, Morgan, and Felicia. And finishing off the Capcom side of things is Nathan Spencer, Trombone, Beautiful Joe, and Zero. And just to round off the Marvel character side of things, Captain America, Hulk, Thor, Iron Man, Deadpool, Doctor Doom, Dormammu, Super Skrull, Taskmaster, MODOK, Sentinel, She-Hulk, X-23, and Spider-Man. Now, as far as the roster goes, I wasn't an avid player of the Resident Evil or the Devil May Cry games, so I was vaguely familiar with some of the characters, and I tended not to use them as much, save for Dante, who's got some really cool moves and combos. In fact, it was mostly the Street Fighter characters I was always using from the Capcom side of things, and it was just a case of familiarity. On the Marvel side, my go-tos are the obvious ones, Spidey, Cap, Iron Man, and the Hulk. Thor was brand new to the series, having made a cameo as an assist character back in the first Marvel vs. Capcom game. Personally for me, in terms of team selection and combinations, Marvel vs. Capcom 3 is kind of limiting for me. There are a handful of combos I make personally from the roster, but I find that the depth is a bit lacking. I mean, they really could have had a better choice of a roster selection. Even the choices of the Street Fighter characters is lacking. I mean, characters like Ken and Bison, Sagat, Cammy, Adon are just a few of the characters that come to mind that I wish had been a part of this. Now I'll move on to the main villain, and whoa, it's a doozy. The fearsome Galactus. His intro is just an awesome sight to see. Like his predecessors, he takes up a large chunk of the screen and hits you with powerful blasts and punches, which can lead up to 100 plus hit combos and take 80% of your health bar. Thanks to this cel-shaded graphical art style of the game, he looks even more fearsome than Onslaught or Apocalypse. To start off with, he sends his minions to battle, so villains in the game like Wesker or Akuma are under his control, and you gotta be quick to beat them, as there could be two characters simultaneously coming after you before you take on the big guy himself. My first encounter had me going, what the hell is this? You have to dodge all his punch or crush attacks, his energy burst can sap your life in the blink of an eye. I mean, it's very chaotic dealing with him as a boss. Blocking doesn't always help, especially with his planet-shattering hand crush that will kill you instantly if he connects. But once you have played him a few times, you get used to his patterns and you just should know when to hit and when to duck. There are very short end-of-game stories once you've completed the arcade mode, which are 2 pages of pictures and dialogue, and that's it. Given the visual style that we saw with adverts leading up to its release, it's very underwhelming to not have a cinematic style ending sequence. Now, the lack of depth with the roster, the lack of playing modes besides the versus and arcade, the game is a fun fighting game to play. The combo system from the previous games is intact here, and it's much easier to pull off. The cel-shaded graphics give it a unique feel and look, and it is a very worthy entry into the Marvel vs. series. Now, it had been announced on July 20th, 2011 at the San Diego Comic-Con that there was to be an updated version of Marvel vs. Capcom 3, Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3. It would have been new background, tweaked gameplay, and new character additions. And I was hopeful that this updated version would bring back some of the omitted favourites that didn't make Marvel vs. Capcom 3. Especially as there were 12 new additions coming to be exact. Okay, this sounds promising, so who's running the fray? Ken, Sagat, Gambit, Cyclops, the Fantastic Four? Well, the new additions were Strider Hugh, Doctor Strange, Ghost Rider, Hawkeye, Iron Fist, Nova, Rocket Raccoon, Firebrand, Frank West, Nemesis T-Type, Phoenix Wright, and Virgil. Really? That's it? Those are the new additions? And yes, I was very much underwhelmed, and I thought, you know what, I'm just going to stick with Marvel vs. Capcom 3. Years later, I had my PlayStation 4 and I was browsing online and I came across Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3 for a bargain price of around £15. I downloaded it and I have not gone back since. Well, largely because my Xbox 360 is out of commission and I haven't been bothered to get it fixed or replaced. But in any event, over time I have come to appreciate what a fun and chaotic fighting game this is. It lacks the charm of Marvel vs. Capcom 2, not to mention the roster depth, but the gameplay more than makes up for that. Of the newbies, I've come to enjoy playing as Doctor Strange and Rocket Raccoon, Nova and Hawkeye. A Spider-Man, Iron Man, Doctor Strange combo gives you a little bit of that Avengers Infinity War vibe, especially when you take on Galactus. A highly respectable 48 characters in total for this updated version of the game made it more fun and engaging. There are also new modes introduced. One is called Heroes and Heralds, which is a single player and multi-team player based mode where players earn new abilities with upgrade cards to customize their characters with new powers, and compete in new factions, as either the heroes defending the Earth, or as one of Galactus' heralds looking to destroy it. The ability cards, which feature various characters from the Marvel and Capcom universes, unlock special power-ups such as invincibility and projectile invincibility, for use during mode-specific combat. Up to 3 different cards may be equipped at once, with more than 100 cards available to collect. And there is a new offline Galactus mode which allows the players to fight as Galactus and play against the computer. I personally love this mode as it is so much fun just ploughing through the rosters on the way to world destruction. I will mention that there is a version of this game which has been heavily modded on the PC and has added a plethora of new fighters, including some of my own personal favourites, Ken, Gambit and Cyclops. Yes, it is palette swaps of existing characters, but they are unique enough in their own right that they feel like separate new characters. They even have the voices used in previous Versus games, which adds a new touch to it. I mean, it is just simply incredible what the modders have done for this version of the game, putting the actual makers of the game to shame. I mean, it gives a whole new life and it feels like an ultimate version of the game. It sadly is only available to users on Steam, not at all available to PlayStation 4 owners, which just has me dying inside because this is a game I would shell out for, no questions asked. Sadly, us console owners have to make do with the awful abomination that is Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite. A topic that I will one day look into covering at some point in the future, but boy oh boy, it is a huge letdown. Hoping the higher-ups of Marvel and Capcom have seen this and they are preparing for their own version. Maybe a Marvel vs. Capcom 4? One can only dream. The game has been an overall success during its life cycle. As of December 2022, it had sold over 2.7 million units across the PlayStation 3, the Xbox 360, the PS4, the PC and the Xbox One. So overall, Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3 and its original Marvel vs. Capcom 3 is a fun fighting game and I have thoroughly come to enjoy it and I do play it quite a bit. I do feel that there could have been more from a roster point of view, and it is for this reason that I usually go back to Marvel vs. Capcom 2. But as I have already stated, the fun and chaotic gameplay, the beautiful cel-shaded graphics, the amazing background artwork, the update which included new characters and gameplay modes makes Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3 a truly excellent fighting game.